Hi, this is Dan Sullivan at Strategic Coach, and I'm very pleased today to be interviewing two longtime friends and great participants in Strategic Coach, Ed Slott and also Jason Smith. And we're going to go on sort of a grand tour of the financial services industry, how it started, where it changed to, and where it is today, each from our own perspectives. And so we're going to be talking about the kind of support that is available today in a very unusual forms just because of the creativity that Ed and Ed Slott and company have brought to the marketplace for financial advisors. And then Jason Smith is here representing Clarity to Prosperity, a marvelous organization that is bringing to bear almost all the great backstage support, training support, marketing support that financial advisors need in the 21st century. So this is a great delight to me. I've had the experience of working with very high-level financial advisors since 1974. And over that time, and I'm just going to put out a structure for the two of you to sort of comment on how this related to your own experience in financial services. Each of us has come from a completely different direction. But what I've noticed is that in the 70s, it was all dominated by companies. So the affiliations that the financial advisors had was with a parent company. Oftentimes, they were called captive advisors. And then what we noticed, especially because of technology in the 1980s, it moved over to much more of a product orientation, and advisors organized themselves around products. And then there was the big emphasis in the 1990s on clients, but without any real structure for doing that. There was just this emphasis that they were there to serve the clients. And then probably around the end of the 90s, and the first part of the century, 21st century, you move into process, that there's unique processes. And I know this is really the jumping off point, Ed, that you got this insight, and you can explain where you came from, the really incredible unique process that you've put together, coming from a very, very specialized area in financial services and financial knowledge.
Right. I started as a local CPA, tax advisors, doing tax returns just for our clients. But I noticed as time went on in the 80s and people started thinking about retirement, especially that not the baby boom generation, but the greatest generation, they were starting to think about it, and the tax laws were starting to develop retirement accounts. But what they never developed until the mid to late 80s is how to get that money out. And the way to get that money out involved a labyrinth of complex tax rules. So I'd be sitting doing somebody's tax return, and I realized, I'd look at the tax return, and I said, "What'd you do?" And it was too late. And I realized at that moment, I was recording history. That's what tax preparers do. They record history. It already happened. I can't change it anymore. And right there, I saw that this is going to be every American, every worker, 100 million people are saving for retirement because we were told that, put money in 401ks and IRAs with no clue how to get it out, how to manage the tax code, and they would be losing their retirement savings, their life savings to taxes, and nobody was teaching this specific area of the tax code. So I actually changed my own practice to go out and train and get consumers to be aware of this proactive planning. In other words, I went to the front of the line. I was at the end of the lunch line being reactive, and I went proactive so these things could be done in advance. By proactive, I mean before it hits the fan. So I don't have to be sitting there with horror stories say, here's what you should have done. And I realized I would say, well, who's your financial advisor? Who put you into these events? Do they have the full plan? They said, no, they never talked about this, and now it was too late. And what happened over the years, I'm going pretty quickly through, say, 20, 25 years, financial advisors, only the tops in their field, and it's still that way today, realize, maybe I should know about this. Maybe this would add real value to me, make me different, navigate the tax code, and not to be tax advisors, but be aware of it, to have support.
Yeah. It's very interesting, Ed. I want to go back to where the crossover point was, where you actually started creating a process for the financial advisors to support them in the, the discoveries that you were being made. But I want to go to Jason, and Jason, you actually come from the advisor background, so you're kind of the main person that we're talking about in this interview. You were that person.
Absolutely, yep. I've been an advisor for about 16 years, and I went through a lot of the same steps that you talked about, that transition that I made of selling products to eventually, when I joined Strategic Coach, is where we started building processes to follow to really just differentiate ourselves and to be ahead of the curve from what everyone else was doing. We found it was just way too much competition selling product. There was no way to really differentiate yourself. So when we started following a process that was built through the Strategic Coach program, that's when things really made a change for the better.
I just want to follow up a little bit, because you and your partner Joe Carstner, we've known each other and are great friends for a couple of years. What was it that from the standpoint of your own training as a financial advisor, and then everybody has to belong to some sort of organization, whether it's a broker dealership that's an independent, or they're affiliated with a large manufacturer of products. All along in your career, what were you feeling not supported in?
Oh, all along, and I was kind of thrown to the wolves from the beginning. I mean, I started out knocking doors with just they used to call them white cards, with a name and an address and a date of birth, and I had to really figure out my own. I wasn't part of any one of these insurance companies that provided a lot of that support. And so I had to really just self-educate myself. I had to find out the best way to position different products and sales and marketing, in education. And so, and really how to run a small business. I was my own small business owner, and trying to figure all those things out. You don't learn that in college. You don't learn that anywhere else. So I sought out organizations such as Strategic Coach yourself, of how to be an entrepreneur, how to run your own business, how to really focus on your unique ability and do what you're best at, and bring in other team members to support you in doing what they're best at. And then joining an organization like Slott, these are some of probably the two most monumental leaps that I took in my career, was joining these organizations. When I joined Ed Slott's group, it gave me the education to justify to really go to that next level, where I was able to start charging fees for the education that I had, that I was able to give to my clients, and then coupled with the process that I developed through the Strategic Coach program, it was just, it was kind of a magical aligning of the stars for me to be able to take my practice to the next level.
Yeah, Ed, tell me sort of the evolution of your thinking, because I can remember when you came into the program.
Yeah.
And what was kind of like the genesis of the thought that something that you had been doing more or less as a one-person problem solver for your own clientele, very high level. You had an unusual slant on, the whole notion of tax planning. But what's the genesis? Where does the idea that this could really be multiplied? Can you kind of step it through, maybe three steps?
I realized that this would affect everyone. Actually came out of the 1986 Tax Act, where the first time these rules really came out on how to get money out of a retirement account. And I realized this is going to affect everybody, and nobody knows anything about it. Not only that, and that's still true today, by the way, most of the big financial institutions, you said the broker-dealers, the insurance company, financial advisors, in their institutions, they don't even learn about it, and they're probably not even allowed to. They don't want them going out of the box there. So there was no place to get this kind of information. So I realized there'd be a national need for it. And just like the coach, we attracted the top people. We became an education company. And the education tied with a process gave the top advisors in the industry a place to go to say, this is what I've been looking for. I never had this kind of support system.
Yeah. You just touched on something that I wish you could take a little further, and that you indicated there's sort of like institutional biases that operate in the way that certain structures in the financial services actually work, where there's a bias against one, the advisor being educated, but also the consumer being educated. Can you talk a little
bit? Well, they
bit?
want that message, and that was another thing. I realized the consumers weren't getting this, and the consumers are getting a lot smarter. I call it now crossover point, where the consumers, the ones that financial advisors want, the ones who save, the ones who have money, are now know more than their financial advisors, crossover point, and they know more than their advisors. So what happens is they have a higher level of education, and they're looking for advisors who can meet that bar or higher, and they're looking to change just at a time when there are trillions of dollars available in new business for advisors. The consumers are looking to make major changes, looking for advisors that have this education and are willing to invest in their education. A lot of consumers are going to advisors that they find out through public television and other alliances I have that have been through this kind of training.
You know, Ed, you just mentioned something. It reminds me, before I joined your group, one of the reasons that I sought out your group and to become an Ed Slott Elite IRA advisor was I started breaking into the high net worth, and it's challenging because they're very educated. And I started noticing that I was getting questions and inquiries about things that I needed to be much better, up on to be able to break into the high net worth. And that's what.
Well, that's the great thing about these programs that we have tied with the process. That I got a lot of those ideas from my coach days. It hit me. This is how, like 10 times Mind Expander, the largest check. A lot of the tools, unique ability you have, can easily take my ideas, put it in a process, and multiply it tenfold, 100-fold. There's no limit where it can go because there are so many people that need it. There are over 100 million people that need these services, and they already know they're not getting it from the traditional institutions.
Okay, Jason, same story. Where was the crossover point where you began realizing that you had to go beyond being a really good salesperson of financial products? And, in the 70s and 80s, they were talking a lot at the institutional level about you have to be a planner, you have to help them plan. But what I noticed with all the plans, they always led back to the sale of the product. They weren't really planning for the individual, they were planning for the product. Where was the crossover point where you began to jump out of that model?
I guess the crossover point was when I did start to get in front of a lot of the, as strategic coach would call, ideal clients, that I wasn't able to go to the next step. They didn't want a product salesperson. They really saw right through that, and I just wasn't having much success in dealing with a lot of the ideal people I would like to work with. So the crossover was when I started to realize that I needed to take a much more comprehensive approach and start to take them through a process. And at that time, it was prior to charging any type of planning fees. Mm-hmm. And the more service and the more support and the more education and more of a concierge type of service I started to provide, I realized too that I could not live off of commissions alone. And it really, a lot of the high net worth people, I find just don't want to move forward with you if you're not, charging a planning fee. Yeah. So all those things kind of came together when I realized that I had needed to go to the next level and be more process-driven mm-hmm. versus product-driven.
Yeah. Ed, you must have found this strange too, because your industry, the CPA industry, charges fees right up front.
We always charge fees.
Yeah,
that was always the motto.
And I always found it because I've been involved with the life insurance industry since 1974. I had my first life insurance top of the table agent, as it turns out. I started off with a good model of what was possible. But I'd get around to the point, and I would talk to them, and I say, I've actually sat in on a couple meetings. They asked me to sit in on a couple meetings with their best clients. And I came away saying, that was amazing thinking process that you just put this client through. And of course, if the life insurance agent was really good, and he had 20 or 30 years under his belt and had seen just about every kind of issue, that a client, especially, people with substance, people right. with big plans, he had this amazing question and answer process that you could see that the person sitting on the other end was benefited, not from the sale of the product that was ultimately going to come down the road, but just the thinking process. And then I said, so how much do you charge them for this first meeting? Oh, no, we don't charge anything. He says, we get paid with the product. And I said, I bet if you asked him right now that before we go on to the next meeting, I'm going to need a retainer of $5,000. I bet, well, it would be yes or no. But I said, if you got a check, you'd know that you were probably going to sell that product at the end of the road. If they give you the first check, they'll give you the last check. So your industry, I've always found a very, very strange industry. The one you came out of. I know you're now a man of great scope and everything else as you've gone on as a financial advisor. But what's that barrier like, and what was it like to talk to other agents about this crossover to actually charging for your wisdom, actually charging for your guidance? What was that like for you, and then what have you observed that it's like for the other advisors?
Well, for me, it was very scary and it was very difficult. It was very difficult to make that transition to charge planning fees. And what made it so much easier is developing a unique process through Strategic Coach. Mm-hmm. And what I was able to do through the network that I had at my fingertips, through Strategic Coach members that were in my class and in Coach that were top planning fee advisors who'd been charging planning fees for years, through Ed Slott Elite IRA advisors, I had just such unbelievable access to people that I was able to interview. So over the course of a year or so, I just went around flying around, just collecting as much experience and knowledge that I could to build the process of how to transition to charge planning fees. Yeah. So as I did that, it was scary and it was difficult, but the more experience I was able to capture and package and put together through all these different resources, the easier it made it to happen. And then secondly, now we've transitioned a number of advisors over the course of the last year over to now charging for their intellectual capital, charging for the experience and the process that they're taking a client through. And what we've done is to make it easier, is developed, taken the unique process and built it into scripts, checklists, videos, audios, flow charts, letter templates, everything you would need to plug and play, in essence.
Yeah. Well, that's your second big jump, and we're going to get to that. The first jump was for you to do it, and now you're teaching other people how to make the jump. But Ed, back to you. When you started to put together the process for the financial advisors to make use of I'll call it the deep knowledge that you have, about the Tax Act and, how to take the complexity and make it into a simplicity. What was your initial thinking about how that process had to work, if you can go back now, because you've been at it for quite a long time?
Well, I created a process. I knew it was about education. We've become an education company. We train consumers and financial advisors. And what we realized by seeing so many consumers, we realized they don't want salesmen anymore. They don't want to be sold. They want educated advisors who have invested in their education. They're reading, also with the advent of the internet and all of that, there's a lot more information available that they can evaluate financial advisors. And it's easy to tell if they're just a salesman. I mean, you can't compete as a salesman. Anybody can get you mutual funds on any street corner. You have to bring something else to the table. And that's what we train advisors on, with a process to take that complex tax knowledge. I call it, we're like translators. Not only are we translators, we digest it, because the average financial advisor can't sit with the tax code like we do all day. They have to be in front of a client explaining it in English. We show them how to do that and how to eventually make the sale, even though they don't even know they're making the sale. They're impressing people with knowledge. And always, the consumers that we see that work with our advisors, they say, I wasn't getting this kind of information from my current advisor. That's the number one comment we hear in our consumer programs all over the country. I always ask people why they show up. And they say, because I wasn't getting this kind of information from my current advisor. It tells me the people with the most money in retirement savings are looking to change to educated advisors. And those are the people that are attracted to our program.
Yeah. So I always love asking this question of anybody, because you grew up in the role that your father had talked to you about. You were following in the family footsteps. At what point was it that you realized that you had just gone to a completely different role in the marketplace?
Well, I think it was a point when, as a sole practitioner, I needed a support system myself. When you're by yourself, I was with my dad, but he was the old-time CPA. You sit there, you work with the clients, you don't leave you don't do anything, especially not market. You don't want to go out there. The clients just come. That was the way it was in the old days. The clients it was the golden rule. If you lost a client, 10 clients would come in. In fact, it wasn't until about the 80s, as a CPA in New York and most states, you weren't even allowed to advertise. But once they broke that, I realized I had to go to a higher level, because otherwise I was just the same as everybody else. Why should they come to me? How could I charge more? How could I get more? So I needed a support system. So the first thing I did is join my state society of CPAs and starting giving seminars. That's what you do when you join the society groups, the professional groups, and you start learning a lot more. And you realize there's this whole body of knowledge that is saleable that people are generally not getting. And I was doing seminars to CPAs, training CPAs, and that worked into training advisors, realizing that this applies to virtually everybody who wants to save anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about you when you realized that there had been a role shift, Jason? When, it's almost like you've become a different creature now from the Jason we would have known 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Not different in terms of, your value creation proposition, but your scope of your thinking about what's possible now. When did you notice that there was a real shift?
As I started to go down this path of really transitioning my team, my practice, my business, and everything else, just the overwhelming response that I would receive in going to different conferences. So many times I would go to different conferences, MDRT, Top of the Table, and in different organizations like that, and I would see these elite advisors and talking about all these wonderful things that they were doing, and it made it so, but then I would go back to my office with my pages and notes and try to figure out how I was going to go ahead and implement all of these things. And it was very challenging and overwhelming, and most times it never got done. And I'm finding that the more advisors I talk to, they have those similar experiences, where there's these great salespeople or these we call them rock star advisors that are doing these wonderful things, but to try to emulate that and actually implement and do it themselves is next to impossible in so many situations. So when I saw that transition, what we decided to do is start to package those through the process we learned in Strategic Coach of building unique processes out of all the best in class advisors all around the country, a lot of Ed Slott advisors, and start building those into processes so that way people could successfully implement a lot of those strategies that are out there.
Yeah. One of the central concepts that I've been making the center of Strategic Coach for close to almost 40 years now is the whole concept that you have a unique ability, and the real trick you have to pull off in life is to find out what that unique ability is and then to connect it to the people that you can really be a hero to. And we're going to talk a lot about this in future episodes, but one of the things that Ed, I'd like you to just reflect on is what do you know about Ed Slott today that you didn't know 20 years ago, in terms of the ability, the impact, the value that you actually create out in the world? That's the first part of the question, and then I'll ask Jason the same question. But the second question is, what's the incredible difference that you see in someone who will go through your process, and then at the end of the process, who were they before they started the process, and who are they at the end of the process? But first we'll talk about who Ed Slott has become over a 20-year period.
Well, first thing is the multiplier effect. I was doing a lot of this and taking this education and having these ideas for one client, and then another client, and as many clients until I ran out of time. And now where I am today, it's people like Jason and hundreds of other advisors all over the country, and they're thousands of clients. So I don't even know how big it gets, but it is having an impact. And people, I hear the success stories or the happy stories. I went from hearing horror stories one-on-one when I used to say, "What'd you do?" to hearing happy stories all over the country. I'm so glad you have that advisor. I was just at a program recently, and the clients actually came with the advisor. Said, "I'm so glad I met him. I'm so glad he's in your program, and we're doing all these great things." And so there's a multiplier out there, effect out there that I don't even know how big it is, and that's because it's unlimited. And it'll always be unlimited, but the consumers, the demand is there. The demand is so much greater than the supply, and most advisors don't get that. They think there's so much competition. There's no competition for an educated advisor.
Ed stole my answer, but no, I mean, for me, it is so much of everything he was saying is what was running through my mind. But I really, everything he just said, I'm going to have to echo it.
I'll say one other thing, though, is during the pause. One of the things when I was in coach is when I made one of my big decisions to walk away from what I was doing. The tax practice. I was still doing one-on-one individual hundreds of tax returns, and I was a control freak, and when I use the word was, people will say you still are, but I walked away from that cold turkey. I just walked away from it and saw a bigger future with my unique ability, created a process. I got a lot of these ideas while I was in strategic coach.
One of the things I found really, Dan, was in focusing in on unique ability, I never really realized, I knew I had the ability to connect with people. In different conferences, I always was drawn to the top advisors of that conference. We'd make connections and we'd share ideas, and it was great. But what I found in coach, one of my real distinct unique abilities is packaging experiences and intellectual capital, and just being able to take that and make it simple and build it into processes and systems that other people can follow. I realize that I'm much more of an educator than I ever thought I was, right. and you've given me the framework to be able to do that and share it with so many other advisors.
Yeah, the interesting thing, more and more, and it's interesting because in coach, financial services is just one of 60 different industries that we have represented, and in every other industry, the same thing I'm hearing from Ed and what I'm hearing from Jason is that it's all about education now. I don't care if it's janitorial services, I don't care, if it's people in the movie business. Everybody absolutely wants education. That if you don't bring an educational component with the commodity you're selling, you'll just be commoditized very, very quickly. The education is how you actually differentiate yourself. And so, going back to the second question that I asked you to think about, you bring a person in here, probably a successful advisor, and I know the type of people who come to your conferences. They're by the standards of the industry, they're extraordinarily successful, but they're just really starting when they come to you. So what's the difference? What's the difference?
We love to see the transition. A big item to me, education, and I see it in every advisor, breeds confidence. And when you have confidence, we have people coming into our group, and I remember a lot of people actually say, "Oh, you keep talking about bringing in $1 million accounts, $2 million. We don't have those kind of people where we live." Well, sure enough, in about 6 months, a year, they're saying, "Oh, our average new IRA is $1 million, $2 million. We don't talk to anybody with less." They're in a different mind. They have the education, they have the confidence, and they have the ability to know they can win business from anybody else. And that's a great feeling when they come back. First thing we do, which I got from you, the positive focus. First thing we do, as you know, Jason, in the meeting, we talk about success stories. I love that part of the meeting. And that's where I see a lot of the growth.
The confidence is so key, Ed, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's what gave me the ability. I used to run into $1 million accounts. I could just never get them before.
Because people can smell confidence on you, just like they can smell fear. You walk into somebody you haven't met. You can tell if they know what they're talking about. Ask them a question, they go, maybe, or you talk to somebody, here's what you have to do. It's a big difference.
You know what I'm finding too is it's not just the $1 million+ accounts. I mean, a lot of my business comes from the $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 IRAs, right. And those people are becoming so much more educated and coming in the door. And if you're not ahead of the curve and staying on top of these things, you're.
But there's even a multiplier with those people. As you know, one of our concepts is go down to the next generation, the beneficiaries, because they will be the beneficiaries of this planning. So they're the perfect succession plan for your business.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great jumping off point for our discussion in the next episode, where we're going to talk about the whole concept of deep support, because I know that really the passion that brings all three of us together is that we have constantly seen ourselves since the beginning of our career of providing the sense of clarity, the sense of confidence, and the sense of capability that financial advisors need to jump to the next level. So that's going to be the framework for our next talk. And I want to say what you learned from the conversation. Just to wrap up here, what did you learn from the conversation?
Well, I learned that everything we're doing as an organization can be multiplied with the combination of other organizations, but with the same core concept: education breeds success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so much similarity to the approach, and there's so much synergy between, I believe, the ideologies and the thought process of everything that we're bringing and wanting to bring to advisors. And that's what, in sitting here talking with the two of you, how much I've really, it's opened my eyes even more of how much we can benefit by working together as a team to help advisors.
Yeah. So this is our first episode in what we're going to call the Deep Support Platform. And we're going to be talking in the future about all the different areas of a financial advisor's life that needs deep support. We have our models, but there's many more models that we're going to talk about. So this is a grand unfolding that we're starting here today. And, it's been just such a pleasure sitting here and to hear the incredible enthusiasm that both of you have about what you've already accomplished, and also just how big the future is for both of you. So we'll talk to you next time.